Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Cannane. Coming up, did Scott Morrison really want the coalition to tap into anti-Muslim sentiments? Why Chris Bowen was heckled at a Harmony Day event? And the poll that shows 51% of Republicans think President Obama is a foreigner. Our panel tonight, Julian Morrow from The Chaser, Stella, editor of the Daily Grind website, and in Melbourne, Jane Garrett, Labor MP for the Victorian state seat of Brunswick. 21 asylum seekers have been sent back to Christmas Island from Sydney today after attending the funerals of loved ones lost in December's boat tragedy. But it's the fate of the 9-year-old Iranian boy Sina that has led refugee advocates to take a formal complaint to the Human Rights Commission. He's lost both of his parents, and even though relatives in Sydney have offered to care for him, the Immigration Minister refuses to release him.
I want to see him in the community as much as everybody else. I need to be reassured that the appropriate psychological care is in place, and I'm moving to do that as quickly as I can.
These people have lost any hope of political institution, political system in Australia, and they wanted a simple answer. Why? What is the difference between Christmas Island detention and Villawood detention? Why the minister is insisting to send these people to Christmas Island and not Villawood?
Jane Garrett, why would Chris Bowen want to send a 9-year-old orphan back to Christmas Island when he has family members in Sydney who are willing to care for him?
Look, I think the minister's comments about compassion for the boy and getting him into the community as soon as possible are very welcome. But I, like many other Australians, are at a loss to know why a little kid who's been through what this boy's been through, lost his family in the most traumatic of circumstances, can't remain in Sydney close to family, who have expressed a love for him and wanting to care for him. And I think the department clearly needs to look at its processes. This has been an extraordinary situation, an extraordinary set of events that has broken the hearts of the nation, and we need to look after this little boy, and I believe he should be in Sydney.
You say the department needs to look at their processes, but the minister does have discretionary powers. Are you disappointed that he hasn't used those discretionary powers to act immediately?
I would be certainly looking for the minister to act immediately in this circumstance. Yes, I would.
Joe, the minister has that power to intervene. Should he use it?
And Jane is right in the sense that it's an extraordinary situation that we face in relation to the tragedy at Christmas Island. But I don't think we should be redefining the processes that we have around processing these sorts of applications. In the light of this tragedy, it seems like a bad basis on which to make those kinds of changes. The reality is this group was being accommodated on Christmas Island, and in an act of compassion, the Australian government has taken them to Sydney so they can attend these funerals. And while their long-term status is worked out as quickly as possible, we hope, they will continue to be accommodated on Christmas Island.
Louise Newman, who's a psychiatrist, specialises in child psychiatry and also detention, she's been advising the government about these issues over the last few years, says that the children involved in that accident are at acute risk of mental disorder. Aren't these extenuating circumstances to release people to go beyond normal protocols?
It's the minister's position, it's the department's position, I think it's everyone's position that this child in particular should be moved into the community as soon as possible. But it can't be as simple as people turning up at the gate of Villawood and saying, oh, we'll take him. The government is right to go through a process and make sure that is accommodated appropriately within the community, and I have full faith that the minister intends to do that as quickly as possible.
Julian, what are your thoughts on this?
I think the key expression is as quickly as possible. I mean, this event happened in December. Obviously, the department and the minister was involved in authorising the transfer over for the funeral. The minister is the legal guardian of this child, and it makes a lot of sense for him to be moved only once and towards his family. I generally think that Chris Bowen's doing not a bad job of maintaining a kind of humane dialogue about the issues, the really tough issues he has to deal with. But I think on the substance of this one, he's done a very poor job. He could have solved this. He has the discretion. It doesn't take any change in the procedures at all for this to be dealt with. He should have done it. He still can do it, and the sooner he does it and fixes it up, the better.
Jane, I guess another option could have been to release some of these members in particular the 9-year-old Iranian boy, but some of the broader people who'd come to Sydney for their funerals into Villawood Detention Centre, where they had family members in that city in Sydney.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think all of these options need to be explored, and again, these processes need to be looked at. I mean, I think this week has been a really defining week in our nation. It has been the product, I believe, of a long history over the last several elections, particularly of the coalition to run a fear campaign about asylum seekers, to seek to gain political capital about the issue. And Mr Morrison's and Mr Abbott's comments this week tied in with what has appeared to be coming out of the
Sorry, are you suggesting that the coalition is trying to make political capital out of the case of this child? I mean, we're talking about this child in particular, and I guess this group more generally. There's nothing that the coalition has been saying this week in reacting to the gossip about what went on behind closed doors that suggests that they want to politicise what Chris Bowen is doing in relation to the case of this child. I mean, you might disagree with what the coalition thinks on border protection, but to accuse them of trying to politicise this individual case, I think, is unfair.
You'd have to be Joe Hockey to do that.
I mean, look, I just think you have to look at the comments about flying rallies all over the country, which most recently Mr Morrison said he did go too far. But once again, you've got a choice in these situations as leaders in the community. You've got a choice to bring together the community to promote tolerance and diversity, or you've got a choice to frighten people. And I think this is a defining moment. This is enough. We have to be having these debates based on facts, based on reality, and based on trying to take the community somewhere that is, tolerant and open, not about trying to say us and them.
Jane, are you accusing the coalition, the Labor government, of trying to scare people about people who arrive by boat?
No, I'm not accusing the Labor government of doing that. I think, as Julian pointed out, I think Chris Bowen's done, a really good job of.
They support mandatory detention.
Well, I'm not saying that these issues aren't complicated. They're public policy issues. So, yes, we need border protection. Yes, we need to have processes in place. What I'm asking for is that the nation approaches these things with respect and compassion. And I think that what's been lacking at the last elections on the part of the Conservatives in this country is a deliberate move to whip up fear and anxiety in the community about these issues.
Well, the opposition leader was forced into damage control today. The Fairfax Press reported that immigration spokesman Scott Morrison urged the shadow cabinet to make political capital out of voter unease about Muslim immigration. Julia Gillard called for Mr Morrison to be dumped from the front bench if those reports were accurate.
Australian government would ever say, if you're Greek Orthodox, you can't come to this country. If you're a Muslim, you can't come to this country. I can't believe that Mr Abbott or Mr Morrison really want to see the nation go down that path. That's why it's so important today that Mr Abbott comes out and says these reports are incorrect and I believe in a non-discriminatory immigration policy, or these reports are correct, Scott Morrison is wrong, he's going to the backbench.
But when he was asked by reporters whether he would sack his immigration spokesman, Tony Abbott praised Scott Morrison's decency.
I think that is a travesty of Scott's position, an absolute travesty of Scott's position. And I just want to stress that as far as the coalition is concerned, we have always had and we will always have a non-discriminatory immigration policy.
And Scott Morrison had his own line about what was said in shadow cabinet.
All I can say is the gossip reported today does not reflect my views. The gossip reported today does not reflect my views. The gossip today doesn't reflect my views today or any other time.
Jules, what did you make of that response?
Well, I'm intrigued to know whether the gossip reported today reflects Scott Morrison's views, because he hasn't really clarified this yet. Look, I doubt that Scott Morrison would have said something like that even in cabinet, because it seems like a pretty kind of ham-fisted thing to say. And I also think that Julia Gillard, in calling for Morrison to be sacked for a second-hand report of something said in shadow cabinet, makes no sense. And Tony Abbott did the right thing to say we have a non-discriminatory immigration policy, but to not take that bait from the PM. What's clearly happening, though, is that there are significant divisions which are spraying outside the party, the Liberal Party, over the way the opposition is dealing with this issue, and the soft Liberals are clearly angry at the way Morrison and Abbott have been dealing with it.
Joe, if Scott Morrison didn't urge this to be raised in shadow cabinet, why didn't he just come out and say, "I never said it, I never would say that kind of thing"?
It's not beyond any stretch of the imagination to think that this was an issue that was discussed, although probably not in the terms that was initially reported. Politicians, both political stripes, I think, are in a difficult position when there are community